What is the biggest myth about Civil War medicine?
The biggest myth is that they weren't using anesthesia when they were doing the amputations and other surgeries. Almost all of the surgeries during the Civil War had some sort of anesthesia, usually chloroform or ether. Most of the surgeons had no dealings with gunshot wounds before, and so just the usual steps for those kind of surgeries got better and better as the war went on. But they also developed a lot of prosthetics. They developed ways to treat facial injuries. Also, the big advances in ambulances and getting people off the battlefield really was first tried at Antietam and very, very successful. And so you see these medical advances that still affect us today. And the first place that they were used was at the Battle of Antietam and consequently in the city of Frederick.
Frederick was kind of an epicenter for the Civil War and for medicine related to Civil War battles, wasn't it?
In a sense, it was. Jonathan Letterman, who was medical director of the Army of the Potomac, started instituting some of his advances in organization at the Battle of Antietam and therefore in Frederick, where most of the wounded from Antietam were shipped. He came to Frederick. He got people to organize buildings, to organize different little hospital setups so that they would have some bureaucracy in place before the wounded started coming in. Before the war, there were no organized systems of hospitals in the Army, and there were few hospitals in the private sector because people saw hospitals as places to go to die. They never considered them as places to go to be healed. And during the war, these large systems of hospitals were set up. Women started to get into the nursing profession and were hired by the Army. Many more volunteered unpaid. And so these hospitals became places of healing. They became places to go where you would get better and then be let out. In fact, the overall death rate in the Civil War hospitals, once the men got to the larger hospitals, hovered at about 6%, which is remarkable.
How many wounded, not just from Antietam, but especially from Antietam, how many wounded were there in Frederick total?
Throughout the war, it's definitely hard to say, but it probably approached 100,000. The hospitals were first opened in 1861 and closed in September of 1865, so it was quite a long period that they were open. Almost all of the churches were taken over as hospitals. The two exceptions were the upper part of the New German Reformed Church and the St. John's Roman Catholic Church, because they realized that people still needed a place to worship. For the residents, it was almost overwhelming. We do have some existing diaries that talk about this. They said the streets were full of wounded. They were, full of men who were on their way to hospitals, men who were taking a break from the hospitals and wandering around town enjoying the many things that Frederick had to offer, and also men who were leaving the hospitals and going back to either their regiments or who had been discharged and were returning home because they could no longer fight. And they do mention that the streets were just crowded with men in all sorts of conditions and all sorts of temperaments as well.